many of you have been writing us and have been on social media with us. You're very concerned about what is happening between Russia, Ukraine, pressing into Ukraine, and Putin trying to pull together the old Soviet Union. We've got a great panel for you today that can bring some insight to all of us. Fred Fleitz, who's the former chief of staff at the National Security Council, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, retired U.S. Army officer, author, and analyst with on-the-ground experience when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Stacy Washington. Stacy is an Air Force veteran, and she's the host of Stacy on the Right. I know many of you follow her because we hear from you when I go on with Stacy. So I want to thank the three of you for joining us today. So Fred, let me come to you. I know you served in the Trump administration, and President Trump really adopted the Reagan model of peace through strength. So how has President Biden's leadership style really varied from that?
Senator, thank you for having me on, and thank you for your leadership in the Senate to try to get lethal aid into Ukraine to stop Russia from taking the country. Peace through strength is something that Joe Biden doesn't seem to understand. This is maybe the weakest and most incompetent administration in history. When Biden says there's going to be severe consequences if Russia invades, the Russians don't believe him. If Trump said that, they would. Now, I'm with the America First Policy Institute now, and we don't just believe in peace through strength, but we also believe in keeping our country out of unnecessary wars, not sending our troops to areas where we do not have strategic interests. We have to stop Russia from invading Ukraine, but we obviously can't send U.S. troops in, use our air assets, our naval assets there. We can't get into a war with Russia. We have to find a way to balance our interest in defending international law and the sovereignty of nations without getting ourselves in a war, and to not push Russia closer to China. It's a balancing act I don't think this administration is capable of dealing with. I know, Senator, you understand that. And when we talk about American troops in your state, I'm sure many of them are concerned. Like, what are they getting themselves into? Are they going to get themselves into a war with a nuclear armed power? No, they're not. But it's something we have to keep a close eye on.
Yes, and Lieutenant Colonel McGinnis, I see you shaking your head, and you have that experience. How has this Biden weakness emboldened Russia to make these moves on Ukraine?
Well, thank you, Senator, for having me today. There's no question that Mr. Putin is using military power in this case as a diplomatic negotiation tool. He's put together a phalanx of 130,000 troops, a lot of ships in the Black Sea, and of course, some sophisticated S-400s, Su-35s in airfields and other areas in the area. He is threatened a host of times. We've seen this in 2014. We saw it against the Republic of Georgia over almost a decade and a half ago. He will continue to do this until he gets what he wants, and that is a new architecture that allows him to have some say over NATO and to keep NATO out of Ukraine and the Georgia Republic, as well as to keep offensive weapons far from his border. So Mr. Putin is a savvy person, a poker player, someone that understands how to do this. And like Fred, I don't want to see young soldiers, young Americans fighting the Russians. That's unnecessary. And this administration could have fixed this a year ago, but they failed dismally to do that.
Yes. Stacy, I know you've worn the uniform and fought, and now with your show, people call in, and I know you had a lot of listeners that were weighing in after Afghanistan. How did that influence what we see carrying out on the Ukrainian border?
Well, I think the big deal with the issue in Afghanistan was that the pullout was mismanaged to such a level that it shocked everyone, not just people who opposed the Biden administration, but on the main, Americans were shocked and dismayed. And then we had a loss of life of 13 troops. And that really made this painful Biden administration even more real for Americans. We saw the loss of life and it was unnecessary. This was a terror attack that could have been avoided had we simply staged our exit from Bagram Air Base, which would have provided us with the necessary tools. It would have been basically modus operandi for other extractions that we've done with our US military. But I was actually speaking about this very subject last night with Lisa Daftari of the Foreign Desk, and she and I were discussing some of the motivations behind Putin's desire to reconstitute the former Soviet Union. And one of them is they have a stagnant population. Their birth rate is negative 9.2. So the Ukraine's is negative 7.2. It's not much better. But by annexing Crimea, he gained 2.5 million additional citizens. By annexing the Ukraine, he will gain another 42 million. And that would get him up to 200 million, as his population has been stagnant for 15 years at 145 million for Russia. So if you look at it that way, this isn't just a move that's made to kind of bolster his strategic offense and defense within NATO. And it gives him more power by a higher population. And it also brings him closer to who he really is as a former KGB agent. So there's a lot to be said here. Senator, you said he's a savvy individual. He is. He plays chess. And the only person who could match him that's currently in the political arena today is President Trump. Former President Trump was able to hold him in basically a stagnant position where under Obama, we lost Crimea, and under Biden, we will lose the Ukraine if something serious isn't done. And all of this hinges on Nord Stream 2, which had the sanctions on Nord Stream 2 not been lifted, we wouldn't even be in this position to have 3,000 of our dear men and women in that arena where they don't belong. So I think that the conversation is one of weak leadership, which we see continually under Democrats. And Americans really have to think about that, because this impacts the price of our oil and our natural gas, and it makes the entire world less stable when we have weak leadership in the executive.
And, you know, I think that you were talking about Putin playing chess and Trump being his match. I looked at this as you've got Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. I call them the new axis of evil, because Russia and China seem to use Iran and Iran's proxies to carry out a lot of what they want done. And North Korea can go over there and they're out testing missiles and kind of freelancing, and I think causing a good bit of concern for all of us. So Lieutenant Colonel McGinnis, talk a little bit about what we are seeing play out, what we saw in Afghanistan, what we're seeing with the lack of preparation and protection for Ukraine, how that is just pushing them to go ahead to invade.
Well, there's no shortage of planning in the Pentagon. I have, almost 50 years working with the Pentagon on these types of issues, and I'm currently there, quite frankly. We understand how to do an extraction and do it right, as Stacy indicated. Now, in 2018, I wrote a book, Alliance of Evil, about China and Russia coming together, much like the old Cold War. But now, as you indicate, Senator, with their proxies like North Korea and Kim Jong-un and all the missile tests, and of course the JCPOA with the Iranians, and probably building nuclear weapons, that we find a very different proposition today, with a weak in America, with China taking over the Middle East, as they are, in fact, with China threatening the West in many ways, not just cyber, but militarily in the South China Sea and elsewhere, that we have a very different proposition. And Russia is emboldened by this. Make no mistake that the agreement, the communique issued jointly by Putin and Xi on the 4th of February of this month, it was a very strong statement about alliance and mutual support. So it's something we need as Americans to recognize, that weakness is not going to be tolerated by the likes of these two evil men.
And Fred, I want to come to you, because in that statement, that strong mutual support, talk a little bit about why you have to have a very strict sanctions approach to Russia, why that works?
I think we have to have sanctions and principled policy. If Putin knows he's going to pay a price, it's going to influence his decision of whether he's going to invade. Now, he invaded Ukraine in 2014, and the U.S. got over it, and I suspect he thinks that's going to happen again. I do a lot of media interviews about this, and a lot of interviewers say, well, how are we going to stop this? And I say, well, you know, this is the result of a year of incompetence, of appeasing Putin, of the Afghanistan debacle, of an incompetent and incoherent foreign policy focused on climate change. So weeks before a possible invasion, I still think the chances are better than 50-50. Undoing it now is really pretty hard. It may be next to impossible. I'm very concerned that Putin has been so almost sarcastic and flippant to British and French officials who met with him. I don't know how he met with the German chancellor today. The chancellor seems to think he solved things. But even if we get past this, the damage this is doing to our reputation, the flounder we've done. Remember, Senator, did you know where the Secretary of State was on Friday when things broke down? He was in Fiji. This is such an indicator of the incompetence of Biden and his foreign policy crowd. So I hope when this is over, there's going to be a major reset. There's going to be a house cleaning, and basically Democrats and Republican members of Congress will go to the White House and explain what a serious situation this is.
Stacey, I know that you hear a good bit about that America First approach from people that have served. What troubles them most? What do they talk about most when they see this aggression building from our adversaries who want to replace us as the world's superpower? China, that wants to be dominant by the time we get to the midpoint of the century.
Yeah, it's a great concern. And one of the things that I come from a America First position myself. I'm an ambassador for America First Policy Institute. And whenever I'm talking to people, whether it's in person or on the radio, the discussion always turns to the unnecessary steps that have been taken over the past 12 months. We've seen unforced errors, intentional moves made by the Biden administration to place America last in energy, in our foreign policy, and in our dealings with these leaders. The weakness is not overlooked. You can see it in when they do the videos of them passing from meeting to meeting when President Biden is overseas. We see him being led around by the hand by his wife, and we see other leaders laughing at him. We see them walking ahead of him, and much was made of President Trump's demeanor when he was with these individuals when he was president. But what we didn't see was mockery. They respected him, they feared him, and they also weren't sure what he would do. And that was demonstrated when he took out, there were 200 mercenaries who were operating within the area of war, the war theater where our troops were located. And our Pentagon and our Department of Defense, everything, all enabled by President Trump to operate without his specific go-ahead, which was the norm during the Obama administration. So President Trump didn't need to be in the Situation Room overlooking actions for our military leadership to take steps. And they eliminated those mercenaries, which put Trump in the position of leadership and authority and put Putin back on his heels. So I often hear people mentioning those times and kind of wistfully longing for the days when we had someone who maybe he was rude, maybe he was gruff, but he was assertive. And people understood who the man in the room was. They understood who the power in the room was, and they dared not cross him. We will be thinking of these things as the midterms approach. And I hear people telling me regularly, routinely, that they're motivated by the desire to have that kind of leadership again. It's sad to see us in a place where we have to suffer greatly on the political stage internationally in order for people to understand how important it is to have America First leadership. But I believe the understanding is becoming more and more real each day.
You know, that is so true, because the absence of leadership is always felt.
It is.
And we're seeing that. Stacey, as we wrap up, where will people find you and be able to follow you?
You can always follow me at staceyontheright.com, and I'm live every night from 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time on SiriusXM's Patriot Channel 125. Thanks, you, Senator, for having me today.
Thank you, Fred. Where do we find you?
You can go to americafirstpolicy.com or follow me on Twitter at Fred Fleitz, FredFleitz. And Senator, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel?
Well, Senator, thank you for having me. My books are all on Amazon Facebook, you can follow me, and otherwise watch me on Fox News.
You got it. Listen, thank you all for joining us and bringing your views and expertise.